History is full of rich connections to God and the great outdoors He created for us. I'm on a mission to fellowship with other fathers as we introduce our sons and daughters to the beauty and bounty of the world where we are blessed to walk with our Heavenly Father in His garden. My name is Jacob Whitley, and this is Fathers and the Great Outdoors. Welcome to Fathers on the Great Outdoors. If you want to continue to support this content, you can check out greatoutdoorspodcast.com. We got some cool merch on there and some gear as well. Today we have Tyler Sparks with us. How you doing?
Good, man. How are you doing?
Doing good. Thanks for taking the time to do this.
Yeah, of course, man. You'll have to excuse my background. We used to have an office space, and then we had unexpected number 2, and that office space turned into an additional bedroom real fast.
Oh, well, when I had my first one in our condo, I had the bright idea that I was just going to put a divider in the middle of my office and the other half nursery, half my office. I'm lucky that my office ended up in my bedroom.
Yeah. That's fair. How many do you have?
3.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's
the oldest, the one that I just mentioned, he just turned 6.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, we got 3.5 and almost 2. He's, what is it? I think June 4th. He'll be 2 years old. So
very cool.
Yeah, it's nothing but crazy chaos 24/7.
Yeah, I can imagine. So why don't you tell me how you got started in the great outdoors?
Yeah, so I come from a predominantly fishing family. Growing up, was a single sport athlete pretty much the entire time. So I started wrestling at the age of 8 growing up. And for those that may or may not know, wrestling usually kicks off at the end of August with practices, and it runs all the way through until typically the first weekend in March, at least in Ohio, where I'm from. And so in terms of the outdoors and what I was able to do from a time constraint standpoint, fishing was predominantly that. You know, it was during the winters I was busy. Weather doesn't really cooperate too much with fishing. So it was like, what are we going to do? And I was obsessed with it, did it for 12 years. So fishing was primarily the big one. I always was that kid growing up that, you know, I saw the displays at Bass Pro and the hunting videos and all that on TV and always kind of wondered about it. But just never had the time. And then got really devoted to fishing in terms of freshwater in North America. Have done just about anything you could imagine with the exception of, fly fishing for trout and salmon, which is on the bucket list. But
yeah,
the down the road, I graduated, kind of got out living on my own and ended up working with a couple guys that were big bow hunters. And I just remember one day we were chatting about it and they were showing me some pictures and telling me stories. And, I told them, I said, I've always wanted to learn and just, never had the mentor to teach or the time really to do it. And one of them in particular, he was a tournament archery shooter. And he basically just kind of told me from an ethics standpoint, like, hey, man, if you're going to shoot deer with a bow, you need to be proficient with a bow. And kind of told me, like, I'll teach you whatever you want to know under one condition. And it was spend a year with him, a few nights a week shooting 3D. And if I wanted to get more into that, I could, but getting proficient with a compound bow to make sure that, if I'm out and hunting deer, hunting whatever, that, I'm confident in my ability to make a good shot. And so I did that. I spent the next year asking him questions, watching YouTube videos, reading articles. I mean, I just dove headfirst into anything and everything that was bow hunting deer. And that was like what started out as just kind of like family fishing trips evolved into hunting deer, which evolved into hunting turkeys. And then I actually just last week got back from a 2-day waterfowl trip out in Kansas. So it's kind of
Yeah.
like, if what is it, if it walks, flies, or what, like it, I'm after it now at this point. It's become a lifestyle much more than a hobby at this point. So
Yeah, that's awesome. Have you done any rifle work with deer, or has it always been bow?
so initially I did bow for, I want to say, the first 5 years. And really it was just because I didn't have a gun.
Mm-hmm.
Was in a position where like I was, putting myself through college and then had a couple jobs that, I was living on my own, providing for myself. My wife had just gotten through grad school and stuff. So like money was tight. Didn't really have the just additional funds to kind of splurge on what I wanted a lot of the times. And so I had my bow set up. I took good care of it. And then somewhere around, I want to say 3 years ago now, I had a really good buddy, Aaron Satterfield. He's got a gunsmithing background, and I kind of hit him up and I said, "Hey, like, I'd love to have, my own kind of custom 350 Legend to go after deer with." And, he was like, "Yeah," he's like, "It's a simple build. We can, work on it together." And I got that from him. And then oddly enough, for the next 2-ish years, every Ohio rifle season would roll around and I would not see a single deer. Like
Mm-hmm.
it didn't matter where or what was going on. I was like, it just wasn't happening. And then this year, same kind of thing. I went out for the week-long rifle season that Ohio has, and I didn't see any deer. And then a couple buddies called me up and said, "Hey, why don't we go do some drives on the first morning of the bonus days?" I said, "Yeah, sure. I've never done that before. Sounds interesting." Didn't see a single deer that morning. And then I went out on some public with another buddy who was kind of tagging along. He tagged out for the year, and he was like, "I'll just come hang with you." And on our way into a spot, we actually bumped 15 deer and just had the most frustrating time with it. Cause in your mind, you're like, I'm carrying a firearm. It shouldn't be hard for me to take an animal. Right. And it was like, every time we kicked one up, it was in the thickest stuff and they'd disappear. And then on the way back out, I had one antlerless tag in my pocket, and we kicked up a what we thought was a doe, and it took off running, and it stopped about 60 yards. And first time I ever got to take a deer with a rifle. And it was just, and on all honesty, it was just as much fun and just as much of a thrill as bow hunting. It was just different though.
Mm-hmm.
I still had the same excitement, still had the same joy from it, the same accomplishment and gratitude and all that. But it was just different. It wasn't greater or lesser or anything for me. It was, hey, I'm out in the woods, and I used the knowledge to find the deer. And once we got to the deer, it was, just a game at that point of trying to figure out, hey, can I get a shot on it? And lo and behold, I was blessed with it and filled my third tag, had the most successful year. And I'm like, all right, now I can breathe a little bit.
Yeah,
I don't have that like tag hanging over my shoulder, like, unfilled. So
that's interesting, because I feel like a lot of people go in reverse, where they start with rifle and go to bow, which is, I'm actually in the process of doing that myself. And it almost seems like it was more difficult for you in a way
to go rifle.
Yeah.
There was an aspect of it, and I don't know what it was about it. I think part of it was because at the time, most of the hunting I did was like very early season. Usually by the 3rd, 4th week in November, I was kind of like done.
Mm-hmm.
Rut's kind of winding up. And I think the big thing for me was really just gaining the knowledge of learning how deer shift around that same time frame, and how that all adapts. And another factor there for me personally was like, ever since I started hunting, I've only been hunting for about 8 years now. And I think a big challenge for me was the fact that I didn't have this abundance of private land either coming into it. A lot of the hunting I was doing was public, one small, like 15 to 17 acre piece of property that I share with my dad, I share with my brother, and then we also share with another buddy of the landowners. And that place usually by the time the middle of November rolls around, it's so pressured that you're lucky to see a deer walk through the place. And everything else that, I was on public most of the time, and public around me in Ohio that late in the year, whether you got a bow in your hand or a gun in your hand, finding the deer during daylight can be really challenging, especially if you don't know what food they're hitting, where they're at. Um, I'm on the western side of the state, and when you talk about public land woods on the western side of the state, it's very limited. And then because of that, it's also very food limited. It's not very hard for it to just get completely blown out because the parcels are small. Now, grand scheme of things, I probably could have gone east to the eastern side of Ohio where there's, thousands and thousands of acres and found something and shot it with a rifle. But again, at the time, traveling 4 hours round trip was, not really in the cards and not something I wanted to do at the time. And so, it's kind of like, hey, go out, sit the private piece. And if I see a deer with a gun, I'll shoot it. And yeah, it was definitely challenging.
Yeah.
For sure.
I feel like that's sort of why I'm looking at transitioning to bow, so that I can start earlier, because one of the places I want to go, rifle for that area starts it's more eastern, or sorry, more western from where I am, and so rifle season starts about mid, sort of toward end of rut for that area. And you kind of have to camp there, so it's going to be super cold. And so if I could basically start like 2 whole months earlier if I jump at that with a bow. So to me, it just seemed, because I had such a bad year this year just being with rifle on the private property I was at. So it just made sense to me to kind of venture out and broaden my horizons a little bit with that.
Yeah. I think that was probably the most primary reason why I started bow, was simply the fact that in Ohio, if you're strictly a gun hunter in Ohio, you essentially, out of a 4-month deer season, get about 2 weeks tops. And 4 of those days are considered, I think it's like primitive firearm, where you're using, anything black powder, muzzle loaders, your flintlocks, all that kind of stuff. It's strictly those types of firearms for 4 days. So you basically get a full, I think it's a full week. It might even only be 6 days, 2 bonus days for shotgun, rifle, whatever firearm they allow. And then almost 3 weeks later, you get a 4-day muzzle loading season right at the very beginning of January. And that's it for guns here. So it's like, if you're wanting to hunt Ohio and all you want to do is gun hunt, you get about 2 weeks out of the 4-month stretch of deer season that you can do so. And so it kind of is like, well, at that point, you're missing out. Rut here is usually the end of October and, into November, and almost that whole month, depending on where you're at in the state and, obviously what does are hot, wind and all that kind of stuff. But you miss out on that entire time if you're thinking, hey, I just want to shoot with a rifle. Well, you miss ideally the most magical time of deer season, right? Like you're just sitting home with a gun watching everybody else post pictures of deer that they're shooting. So I think that was a big proponent to me wanting to do bow hunting, was just the fact that I had 4 months that I could continue hunting versus, oh, hey, I want to get into hunting, but all I've got is, a slug gun. Well, congrats, you're limited to 7 days or 8 days of shooting deer. Yeah.
Have you started introducing your kids to any of this, or even fishing?
Yeah. So I kind of did it unintentionally. Growing up, my dad was like very big on taking us fishing every chance he got. I grew up with a single dad, and he had primary custody, and it was like fishing was the thing that like he enjoyed the most at the time. And so if he was going to do it, he had to figure out ways to take us along with him, or else, he didn't get to go. And I think a lot of that aspect I kind of adapted when I became a dad. So, my oldest 3.5 years old now, when he was born, I want to say, during the time when like he was, newborn and I was home from work for a while, I watched hunting shows when I was hanging out with him, and, he probably didn't grasp too much of it, but it was just kind of that, like, hey, if I'm chilling and he's sleeping on me, I'm going to turn on, YouTube and watch, whatever shows I want. And down the road when he was, I want to say maybe 9 months old or 8 months old, he really took a liking to watching deep sea fishing. And I don't know if it was the colors of the fish and the blue water and all that kind of stuff, but I could turn it on and he would sit right there and he would just, soak all of it in. And then he started to pick up on emotions when the guys would like catch a fish and bring a fish on board that I'll be excited and celebrate. And so then every time they caught a fish, he'd get excited and make a bunch of noise and celebrate. And and I
Yep.
kind of started to pick up on it with him. And then when he was just under a year old, there was a summer I wanted to get out and do some scouting. And um, honestly, like I told my wife, I said, I might just take him with me. And I, kind of told her it wasn't a crazy hot day. I had one of those chest carriers that I could throw him in. And so I just kind of told her, I said, hey, I was like, why don't, you take a day and just do whatever you want. I said, I'll pack, some food and all that. And somewhere or another, I've got a couple photos and videos of, I literally threw a backpack on me with all the stuff, some trail cameras in my saddle, had him in the chest carrier, and we went out and spent probably about 6 hours scouting some public ground. And I actually hung a couple trail cameras with him.
Hmm.
Threw my saddle on, tied off, and climbed up and had him right in front of me, and um, got a couple pictures of like while I'm hanging the camera and messing with it and everything. It's snapping pictures of us, and he's just like zoned out looking at the camera, trying to figure out what's going on. And he kind of just has a natural like for it. I don't know if it's that innate desire of, especially with sons. I don't know if it's that innate desire of a son to want to do what his dad's doing, or if it genuinely is like his thing that he enjoys. Because, as he got older, I took him fishing a couple times with my dad and I, real short trips, an hour, hour and a half, catch a handful of panfish, bluegill, crappie kind of thing, show him, he'd touch them and kind of see them. But that was really the extent of it. And then the following year, when he was kind of around 2.5, he started asking questions about hunting. Hey, why do we shoot deer? Or, when do we shoot deer? And um, all that kind of stuff. And I ended up, I ended up getting him a little Primos toy bow that shoots darts. I think it was not this past Christmas, but the Christmas before. And he loved it. He was super excited about it. It came with a big blow up deer that he could shoot at.
Hmm.
And I had to help him because I was a little bit maybe too eager for it. And so he wasn't necessarily strong enough and big enough yet to where he could pull it back. And so for about a year, he would actually bring me the bow and, Dad, can we hunt? And I would hold it. And he had a pair of binoculars. And really what we started off with for him was I would turn on the TV and I would pull up a live whitetail deer camera channel. And it was literally somebody that just had a trail camera or something stuck out in the woods over a feed pile, and deer would come and, in and out of the frame on it. And I would sit there with him, and we actually built a blind out of the couch cushions, and we
Heh.
climbed in there.
That's
He had
fun.
his own binoculars, and he would look at the TV, and then he would see a deer, and he'd turn, and he'd be like, Dad, shoot that one. And he would, I'd say, I'd be like, well, what do we do? And he'd, of course, his favorite thing is Matt, Matt. He'd stop the deer, and I'd pull his little bow back, and we'd shoot a dart TV, and it would stick. He'd get all excited and everything. And then we'd hide the blow up buck somewhere in the house, and he'd have to go find it and then pull it back out. And that was kind of his first real experience from the hunting aspect. Last summer we took him fishing a bunch. He caught his first catfish, his first largemouth, his first bluegill. Was super over the moon about it. And then this year was the year where I was on some pretty big deer and had some pretty ambitious plans for opening day. And here in Ohio, all the aftermath of the hurricanes that hit down there
Right.
had hit all that week leading up to opening day in Ohio. And so it rained for 6 days straight, just absolute downpours. And the day of opening day, there was a stretch from 6 a.m. until almost 11 where there was going to be no rain. And I kind of thought to myself, like, perfect. It'll be cold. Deer will be moving like crazy during that window. Like, it'll be awesome. I went out, got set up in a spot, didn't see anything. There wasn't a single deer on its feet that morning. But the night before, I remember sitting down, getting ready to put him to bed, and he kind of, he has this routine at night where he asks, what are we going to do tomorrow? And I told him, I said, well, I don't know what you're doing. I said, Daddy's going to go deer hunting in the morning. And without missing a beat, he was like, well, can I come? And because we had taken him squirrel hunting at the beginning of September. And I said, well, it's going to be really cold tomorrow. I said, it's going to be raining. Dad's going to get really wet. I said, I don't want you to get wet. I said, I'll find time where you and Dad can go deer hunting this year. And just like telling him no for that, I never, and this is where I don't know if it's, hey, I want to go do what Dad was, or he genuinely has a strong interest in it. But when I
Right.
told him no, like he just sank. Like borderline crying, just, tear filled eyes. And so I told my wife, I said, I'll have to figure something out and get him out in the woods. I honestly didn't expect it to be until he was like 5, just because of his, his energy level and, him always wanting to be doing something and that kind of thing. So we had started kind of practicing throughout the house where I said, hey, if you want to deer hunt this year, you got to learn to whisper and be quiet. And so we would pretend in the house that, we were out hunting, and he would have to whisper to me and walk real soft and everything. And he got pretty good at it. And so I called my dad up and I said, I asked him if he was still putting some corn out at the private piece or not. And he said, yeah. And he asked me, I hadn't been out there in almost a year. So he was like, why do you ask? And I said, well, I might swing out there with Tony and see if we can, see a deer or something out there with Tony. And he said, yeah. So we, told my dad, I said, if you want to come, go for it. If not, stay home. He goes, yeah. He's like, I might swing out there with you guys. And so the property we have, there's about a 200-yard long alfalfa field. It's about 60 yards wide, and it's separated from a private ag field that we don't have permission for by a big line of cedar trees. And we cut a natural blind into the backside of the cedar trees, and you could sneak in on the backside of it and then jump right into that little spot. And there's a little shooting window about 35 yards from the bait pile. And we went out there that morning, and my dad set up in a 2-man ladder stand about 100 yards away on the other side of the field. We're sitting in that little blind on the ground, and I put one of those cheap moving blanket pads down for him to sit on, and he's in a sleeping bag with, every snack you could imagine. And, he had my phone, was watching videos on it. And my dad is, somewhere off there. I can't see him from where we're at, but that morning about 8 o'clock, I kind of peeked through some of the cedar trees, and there's a couple deer coming down the line, and they were going to walk right in front of where we were. So it kind of, nudged, Tony, and was like, hey, look, there's deer coming. And I picked my bow up and was getting ready, and we waited and waited and waited, and nothing happened. And I couldn't figure out where they went, because I was like, there's really nowhere for them to go without me seeing them, because it's a wide open field. So I finally turn around and I look, and I caught a glimpse of her tail, and she was slowly going off the other direction back towards my dad. And about 15, 20 seconds later, I hear his crossbow go off. And I was like, okay, cool. He shot one. And Tony gets all excited looking at me. What was that? I don't, he has never heard a crossbow go off. So he was kind of like, what was that? And it got his attention. And I told him, I said, Papa shot a deer. And he got all excited. And I said, let me see my phone. And I looked at it, and I had a text. My dad said, doe down. She went down 20 yards from me. And so he and I are in the middle of celebrating, and, he's all excited, and he's, immediately was like, can we go look for it? Can we go look for blood? And I was like, no, gotta wait. I was like, we're going to wait a little while. And I said, it's still really early. It's, I'm like, we're going to give it some time. And so his next question was, well, can I have more goldfish? I said, sure. So I'm in the process of getting him goldfish, and I start to hear some leaves moving, and we had watched the same, just like every other deer hunt, 6, 7 squirrels come hit the corn, and then they run away, and then they come back and they run away. So that's what I thought was back. And I turn, I look up, and sure enough, there's another doe coming out of the trees right there. And in the probably 6 years we've been hunting this property, we've never seen more than one deer at a time out there. I mean, it's literally just like that barren for the most part. And to see another deer that fast after a shot and everything was just mind blowing. And so I'm freaking out now, and because I'm like, oh my gosh, we might get a double. It's never happened for us, and Tony's there, my oldest, and he's, all excited already. And so I told him, I said, hey, there's another deer coming, be quiet, don't move. And as soon as she stepped out, she saw me moving with my rangefinder, and she stopped and just stared right at us. So I'm like whispering to him, don't move, be quiet. And from behind me, I can just hear this crunching noise, like crunching on food. And I'm like, dude, like be quiet, and I could not for the life of me figure out what he was doing. She never spooked. Um, she kind of calmed down a little bit. She walked out, and as she was moving from right to left, I asked Tony, I said, do you want me to I said, can you see her? And he said, yeah. And I said, you want me to shoot her? He said, yeah. And I was like, okay. So I ranged her one more time at 30, drew my bow back, shot her. She ran, 40 yards and dropped. And I was watching footage back the next night, and I noticed that the entire time that she was standing there in front of us, he had put the goldfish in both his hands like this. And in order to not move while he was eating his goldfish, he would stick his tongue out and like stick a goldfish and pull it into his mouth and then chew that goldfish up. So he couldn't move the whole time.
Yeah.
But he was so ate up with it. We did that. We had him, we knew where both deer had gone down at. We watched it happen, but he was so adamant about we got to look for blood. We got to look for blood. So he blood trailed both those deer right to where they were. And he was just over the moon about it. And like from then on, he's in preschool. He told the kids at preschool about it. He told his teachers about it. He told my mom and stepdad. He told them about it. And even just tonight, he went and picked up that same Primos bow, and we wanted to see if he was strong enough to pull it back now, and he is. And so I flipped the TV on, and I pulled up that same deer live cam, and I said, go ahead, buddy, shoot a deer. And the thing that impressed me, and I think it's a really cool testament to one of those moments where you kind of realize like people always tell you like your kids are always watching what you do more than what you say. And I feel like there's always these little nuanced moments where you realize that and you actually see it kind of play out in front of you. And so he's standing there in front of the TV holding the bow, kind of like, he's got the bow in his left hand and he's holding the string like this. And the two deer are standing quartered to the screen and there's no shot available. And he and I had talked about, where you shoot the deer, and he doesn't have it. Well, one of the deer starts to turn sideways. And so he starts to raise his bow up like he's going to draw it. And then it keeps turning and he misses the opportunity. And so he went back down and he relaxed. And then the second deer did the same thing and he went like this to do it. And then it turned and he relaxed. And then the first deer, it turned completely sideways and it stopped. And so he drew it back and he ended up shooting it perfect. And I was just sitting my wife was laughing at me because I'm sitting there like my jaw's on the floor. Like he's 3.5 years old and he's already a better bow than I am. Like I'd have been at full draw shaking. Like I wouldn't have been able to let down, it blew my mind. So it was just one of those cool moments, like I guess as a dad, where I'm like, you know what, maybe this is something that he's actually excited about. It's not just, like he's starting to get a better understanding and an actual desire for it, not just like, oh, hey, dad likes it, so I'm gonna like it kind of a thing.
Right. Is his like a recurve where it wants to snap back, or does it have that for like the back end forgiveness that a compound has?
I don't know. So the riser is plastic. The limbs are made, I think it's like plastic, but then there's almost like it's almost like a really thin leaf spring on the underside that's notched into the top of the riser, and then it's notched into a little pocket at the back end. So it's got fake plastic cams on it that don't move. Mm-hmm. And then it's got a string that's secured at the top that goes around the cams to the bottom. And then there's like a little plunger that goes into a tube that shoots the dart out of it.
Right.
And so when he pulls on it, I'd say it probably is similarly tensioned to like a recurve where, the further into that draw you're getting, the more tension you're getting on it, which personally I like because it means it's going to get stronger. He should be able to shoot a bow a lot sooner than most kids do in terms of an actual bow.
Right.
But he had no issue with it tonight, which really surprised the heck out of both of us because for the past couple of years, he hasn't been able to get that sucker to move more than an inch. And tonight he had it drawn back almost a little over halfway through the cycle. And I think he probably did it about 10 times. And he said he was tired.
Yeah. Now do some push-ups.
He's like, I'm sore, and I was like, you might feel it a little bit tomorrow in that, the right side of your back. But
ooh, yeah.
Yeah, it was really cool. Really cool.
You say he's 4?
He is 3.5. He'll be 4 this coming September, right around Labor Day.
Okay. He is pretty young.
So, yeah. And that's it. So it blows our mind about it because his younger brother is just now starting to kind of get more excited about it and more interested in it. And he's a little over 1.5. He'll be 2 this coming June. And like tonight, he was like all excited about seeing the deer and everything. But a couple months ago, he like could care less. I'd be showing pictures to my oldest from trips this past year, and the other one would kind of come in and look, and then he'd walk away. And now he's getting to the point where like he actually wants to sit and watch and listen and hear and that kind of stuff, which is really cool that he's kind of following. And that's putting me in the dynamic of trying to explain to my oldest that the example that he and I set is going to be the one that his younger brother follows, and there's going to be things that you as the older brother, you get to teach him. You get to show him the things that you've learned, so that way you can continue to pass that on. And then the stuff that neither one of dad will teach and that kind of stuff. So it's creating a really cool dynamic between the three of us. The older and older that they get, and I'm getting excited because Jet is the younger. He's about to the point where I think this year I'm going to take him out solo on a couple scouting trips, the same way I did with Tony. And then when he turns 3, I'll take him on his first squirrel hunting trip with me and my dad, just like I did with Tony. And then probably that year we'll try and figure out how the 4 of us can somehow get out and hunt deer together. I don't know how it'll work yet, and it might be I take Jet and my dad takes Tony, or vice versa, or something. But we'll figure out how to get them both out for sure.
Yeah, I'm curious how my kids are going to go. I was talking to my oldest son tonight. He's 6, and I was trying to explain to him because I want to take him out on a upland hunt.
Yeah,
coming up. I'm doing one myself with a new place with some buddies, and just to kind of get a feel for it, and then I'm going to do it again with my oldest. And I'm explaining to him like what the process is, why I'm going first, and things like that at the dinner table. And he's just like, like I've been asking him to go out hunting, but he's very nonchalant about it. And then out of the other side of the table, my daughter, who's the middle kid, is like, I want to go. Can I go instead? She's the one showing all the enthusiasm. But my wife and I guess more me than her, but we joke that she's going to be the one that's completely okay with field dressing and stuff. Like, yeah, let's just do it. Come on, let's cut it open. Let's see what's inside. She's a lot more into weird stuff like that.
Yeah, I'm curious. It's so weird, the different dynamics of kids, like especially because like they're obviously same household, same generally same parent and rules and stuff kind of like that. But I'm kind of in the same boat, and I think when Tony was right around 2 years old, his uncle, my brother, shot his first deer, and I got the call. It was last year. I just came back from a week-long bear hunting trip in Michigan with my dad, and my in-laws were in town, and I went to sleep that night. I was exhausted from the trip. Like I was just completely worn out. And so I thought about hunting opening morning here in Ohio, since my in-laws were still in town. We had the extra help, and there was no way. I was so exhausted. I called my dad, and he didn't even answer my call because he was so tired. He slept through my phone call. So my brother said he was going to go out by himself, and I got a call. My brother is impatient a lot of the time. Like sitting still for a long period of time is hard for him. He loves fishing because it can move around if something's not biting, or different dynamics of that. But with deer, it's like, man, he gets an hour goes by and he's like, there's no deer here. I need to get up and do something. And so he texted me sometime around, I don't know, 8:30 or something that morning, and it'd been daylight for about an hour, and he said, I haven't seen anything yet. And I said, I know. I said, just hang out there. I said, stay there until at least 10 before you get up and do anything. I said, you're probably going to see something. I said, and this property in particular, my dad and I, opening morning, have skipped this place for the last 4 years and gone somewhere else on public. And for 4 years straight, opening day that morning, there'd be at least 2 or 3 deer out there hitting the feed pile, first part of the day. And we always kicked ourselves because we knew it was going to happen. We wouldn't go. We'd go to public, and sure enough, we'd get pictures of camera pictures of deer there while we're sitting on, miles away. And I'd be like, "Ah, unbelievable. So I told my brother, I said, dude, just hang out there. Like, don't leave. And I go back to sleep, and it wasn't 45 minutes later. My phone's ringing, and I rolled over and I looked, and it was him. And my wife's like, "Are you going to answer?" And I'm like, "Well, he either missed his first deer or he drilled his first deer." And I said, "I'm kind of scared to find out which one it is." And so I answered, and I said, "Hey, what's up?" And he's just coming unglued. "I just shot my first deer. I just shot my first deer. Oh, I don't know what to do. Dad won't answer. I don't know what's going on. And just full on all the adrenaline and everything. And so I talked him down a little bit. We made a game plan, and I told him, I said, "Well, if you can't get a hold of Dad," I said, "I will drive out there and I'll help you." And then I said, "Do you care if I bring Tony?" He said, "No." He said, "If he wants to come, sure." And so I went right across the hall and went into his room, and it was still fairly early. At the time, he was still sleeping in pretty late. And I just kind of nudged him awake, and he sat up, and he was kind of groggy. And I said, "Hey," I said, "Do you want to go help Uncle Austin get his first deer?" And he just immediately, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, let's go. And it was like he went from half asleep to wide awake and ready to go. And, we drove out there, and he helped us with that. And then he saw the field dressing process. And I don't think he was bothered so much with the field dressing process as much as he was, about his uncle, because we always told, my brother, we said, "Hey, if you're going to come deer hunting and you take your first deer, like we have this thing where, like, you owe it to the animal to attempt to do this process yourself."
Mhm.
We're like, it's your animal that you chose to shoot. It's the life you chose to take. Like, you owe it to try and do this yourself. Because he was always very freaked out about the field dressing process. He's like, it's a lot different. He's cleaned, hundreds, if not thousands of fish in his lifetime, but he was just like, there's something weird and different about it. I don't know how to describe it. And so I told him, I said, "Look," I said, "you start and you try and do it." And I said, "If you have to tap out, one of us will help." And he started. Um, and right at about the time he got the knife up to the sternum, he went to readjust, and he poked a 1 inch hole in the stomach. And all that air came right out into his face.
Oh,
We were in a creek bottom with no wind, and so it just hung there. And he's running up and down the creek bank, gagging, just trying to get away from the smell. And he can't figure out which way to go. And my dad and I are in absolute tears laughing. And Tony is like, "I don't know if I should laugh with them or be concerned about my uncle." Like, I don't, he's just like kind of in the middle of everything.
did the smell
Um,
bother him?
Not at all. He didn't really even care. Like, he was sitting there. I think so. He watched us field dress both the deer that my dad and I shot. And then he came back to the house, and he hung out and watched us. We skinned, quartered him out, and got the meat off the deer, and then threw it in a cooler, brought it all inside, and he sat there with that, like, just inquisitive, like, "Oh, is that blood? Oh, why is there blood? What's that for? What's this?" The whole time. Really surprised me. Um, the younger of the two, I don't know how he's going to do yet. He seems much more on the tough, resilient side of personality, but at the same time, it could be the one thing where I feel like everybody has that one thing, and that might just be his. Where the moment we cut it open and he sees it, he's just like, "Nope." I don't know yet. So I get that dynamic of kind of like figuring out which kid's gonna like what and tolerate what and have the interest in it as well.
Yeah. Have they gone through the process with gutting fish too?
Um, I don't think so. I don't think they've watched a fish be cleaned yet. Not that I can remember. But I don't think it would bother either one of them. Especially not my oldest. I mean, he watched me this past week for an hour clean ducks in a kitchen sink, and he kept asking, "Can I see it? Can I see the inside? What's it look like now?" Every 5 minutes I'd have to stop here. All right, go back to doing what I'm doing. All right, here. Like,
Yeah.
um, so I'm curious how they would do with fish, if that'd be weird for them or not, or if they would even bat an eye at it. I don't know.
Was that from the Kansas trip you just took?
Yep.
So
Yeah,
go ahead.
that was crazy. It was
Yeah.
a crazy trip.
I'm curious. I was reading a little bit about your post about it. Why don't you tell me kind of how that got started.
Yeah. So, um, most people, I feel like by now within the hunting world, are familiar with the company Elevate, Elevate Stand Co. They do kind of like the micro hang on type of stands, super lightweight. Um, and the year that they came out, I'm part of the Mobile Hunter Expo, and they were one of the vendors that were there, and got a chance to stop and talk to them about the stand that they were releasing that year. And just through getting to chat, we realized like we had similar faith beliefs. We both kind of chatted about our testimonies and a little bit about our backgrounds in those lights, and connected over obviously deer hunting and the stories and stuff. I ended up purchasing one of their stands that day at the expo, as I wanted to get something more in that realm of just super lightweight hang on stand.
Mm.
And we just kind of kept in touch through social media for the most part. We'd have some conversations here and there. The next year, saw him again at the expos, got to chat with him a lot more. And that was actually the year that the younger brother of the two that owned the company, he had a son named Reed, and Reed was very big into fishing, hunting, all that kind of stuff. He had a spot on a high school bass fishing team that they were actually very, very competitive at. And then outside of that, he went to Alaska fishing for salmon with his uncle up there a couple times and his dad. He'd shot a couple nice deer. He'd done waterfowl hunting and turkey hunting. I mean, he was just enthralled with the outdoors. And last year, it was in 2024, I believe it was in February, we all got a message kind of from one of their family members, essentially informing us that Reed had passed. And it was very unexpected. Nobody was ready for it. I mean, nobody ever really is ready to lose somebody that close, but for it to be 16-year-old son and tragedy strikes, like it just it wrecked a lot of us. It especially because we're all dads, and it really hit home for us. And then being centered in my faith as I was, I immediately reached out to them and started talking to them and asking them, what can I do? How can I pray for you guys? What do you guys need? That type of stuff. Cause they're just amazing stand-up individuals. And I think it was the older brother, Josh, he had said, cause I essentially asked him like, hey, if there's any way that I could send you guys, some type of monetary, something just to offer some kind of relief. Like it's really all I can do, because you guys are in Kansas, we're in Ohio. I want to do something. I'm feeling pushed to do something, and that was kind of our conversation. And he said, yeah, he goes, if you want to do that, he's like, we're gonna have something posted in a couple days. And I said, okay, cool. Well, Chris, the guy that runs our Mobile Hunter Expo team, he reached out to the core team and he said, hey, if anybody wants to donate to their family, he goes, let me know. We'll put it in a big pool. We'll make it from the team. And I said, okay, cool. I sent him a message later on that night and said, hey, my wife and I talked, I've got some funds I want to give to him. And, just kind of asked him like, hey, how do I get this to you? And so I sent it to him. He turned around, and the very next day, they posted a link. And if I remember right, they posted a donation link, and he turned around and he donated the money I had given him. He turned around and he donated it. And then 2 days later, they actually shared another post from the Elevate business page, and two friends that are very close with the family that have some good connections in the outdoor industry. They had essentially gotten together and built a prize package giveaway that they were going to do in memory of Reed. And essentially what it was just saying, hey, we're putting this on. If anybody wants to donate to the family, donate through this link and you'll get an entry into this giveaway. And the giveaway was an outfitter that they had used in Kansas for waterfowl before. Basically said, hey, we'll give 2 days of waterfowl hunting away in memory of Reed. There was a couple other companies that got involved. Onyx was mixed in there. Hunt Vault was mixed in there. Just a bunch of companies that they had connections with that were close with the family, that Josh and Jared had done work with before, and that kind of stuff. And they really just kind of said, they all pulled together and said, hey, we want to do something to give you guys something. Like this is hard for anybody, but and they put that together. Well, unbeknownst to me, they actually used the same link when they posted 2 days after I had donated. And we basically, like, I essentially got an entry into it and I didn't know that because I gave the money to the family. I'm like, here, if you need something, call me. Right.
Yeah.
And I want to say maybe 2 weeks later, I think it was after they posted that, I got a call from Chris. And it was kind of weird because he rarely ever calls me unless it's Expo season and he's giving me updates about something. And I kind of was like, I was driving back to the office from lunch and I almost didn't answer it, but I was like, what the heck? I got a 15-minute drive. Like, I'll see what he wants real quick. And I answered and asked him what was going on. And he said, hey, he's like, I've got some exciting news for you. He's like, it feels weird to celebrate, but it is a very cool thing. And he goes, and I think you should celebrate it because the person who it's for would want you to celebrate it. And I'm like, okay, what? Like, you're weirding me out, like, what's the deal? And he said, well, you won the Elevate giveaway for Reed. And my first question was, what giveaway? Because I mean, at the time, I didn't know they were doing a giveaway. I didn't even know I entered a giveaway. And so I asked him, I said, what are you talking about? And he said, well, he goes, that money that you gave me, he goes, I donated it for you. And he said, I went through the link that they provided and it was the same link they used for the giveaway. And he was like, so you automatically got an entry. And he was like, I didn't even know about it at the time. And he was like, but yeah, and completely caught me off guard. And I mean, I didn't have words. I didn't know what to say or think or do. In honest, full transparency from a faith perspective, the only thing that popped in my mind at the time was the law of sowing and reaping. And it's the first time in my life I've ever seen that happen like that fast. Like, we were told to give and we gave just out of obedience and turned around and had a blessing that was just insane. Because I never in my life is, the kid with my background growing up where I did and the financial situations and all that, like I never in my life would have been like, yeah, I'm going to go to Kansas for 2 days and have a guided waterfowl hunt with some of the coolest people ever. And, and so I was floored. The next day, Josh called me to tell me. I told him, I said, yeah, I talked to Chris yesterday. And the cool part about it was just like finding out, like, we were all kind of nervous about the giveaway. And the reason being is because, like, initially nothing really opened up them to the public. And once they decided, like, hey, we're doing the giveaway, well, then it was kind of the dynamic of like, well, this is a giveaway in memory of Reed. Reed was the one who'd went on the trip last year, and it's really the only reason they had an open spot this year. And there was this whole dynamic of like, what if it's somebody that we don't even want to be around? Like it's the first trip we're going to do, the first annual trip of this that we make that we're going to do without him. And what if we get some Yahoo who's just disrespectful or profane or, just not fun to be around or a problem or unsafe or just anything. Right. I mean, and what was really cool was I went to the Michigan Expo this past year and ran into Josh and got the chance to talk to Josh a little bit about the trip and what was the plan, what was going to happen and everything. And it was really cool just how honestly, like, excited we actually were about the trip because we're already friends. We already know, our backgrounds and what we like to do and how we are. And so that dynamic kind of made it a lot cooler.
Yeah.
And then, fast forward, we kind of forgot about the trip. And then all of a sudden it was Christmas. And the week before it, I went to South Carolina for a week with my wife and kids to see the in-laws for Christmas and spent Christmas down there. Came home for maybe 2.5, 3 days, and then hopped in my car and drove 11 hours to Kansas and experienced waterfowl hunting for the first time and had absolutely got spoiled. I mean, as many times as I talked to guys before the trip and even just knowing anyway from being a guy that grew up in Ohio and, there's not a lot of birds around here other than geese in the urban areas. And, it was kind of fun going out there, but I mean, I got spoiled. I'll unless I go back again, I probably won't see, duck hunting like that anywhere here. I'm gonna have to travel to another state to find something like that again. But it was very cool. The whole time I was just grateful. Like they kept asking me, what do you think? And I didn't have a lot of words to describe my thoughts and what was going on around me because everything happened at a comfortable pace, but it was still fast enough that like I didn't really get the chance to sit in the moment and like think about what all was happening. And then I think it was the end of day 2 when I was there. Reed's dad and we got to sit down and we had probably about an hour and a half, 2 hour conversation surrounding spiritual warfare and our faith beliefs and just shared some stories about things we'd been through in our life that, without God, we probably wouldn't have made it through and, or at least wouldn't be where we were today with the families that we had today and that kind of stuff without him. And that was probably, in all honesty, like, it's just like anything, right? The goal was to go out and shoot ducks, and we went out and we shot ducks. But the highlight of the trip for me was that 2 hour conversation. Getting to connect with him on a level that, I don't connect with a ton of people on, and hearing vulnerability from him and sharing vulnerability of my own life in relation to try and connect with him and different things he was facing and navigating, and then vice versa, him sharing stuff about his life and, different perspectives and stuff. That was, for me, that was the highlight of the trip because that just touches a different level that, just going out and shooting an animal is not gonna do for you.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a lot of fun, and I had 11 hours to drive back to figure out what I was going to say about it, when and if I made a post. And once I did, it was cool because Jared texted me and he was like, "That was awesome." He's like, we all agreed there was just like there was a good feeling of peace the whole time we did the trip. There was, there wasn't any down moments. We weren't, upset or any kind of that stuff. It was just purely joyful camaraderie, fellowship the whole time,
Yeah.
which made it honestly, like I told them before that when I came out there, anything and everything I did or we did on that trip, I wanted to do in honor and memory of Reed with him in mind. And we completely knocked it out of the park. There wasn't an aspect of that trip that wasn't that aspect, which was cool. Very cool.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, it seems like a good transition into something I always like to ask. Where do you see God in the great outdoors?
Um, Honestly, everywhere. I grew up being in the outdoors, and the more and more I learned about creation, and the more and more I see creation now, especially, it's so. I just find it harder and harder and harder every time I go to deny it. Like it's one of those things that I think for me, the times I see it the most is, and it might be why morning hunts are my favorite, but there's something about the morning when you go in the dark and everything's just quiet and asleep and you don't hear much, you don't see much, and then the sun starts coming up and you just kind of slowly watch like creation come to life.
Mm-hmm.
Every animal starts moving. You start to see birds. You see, not my favorite, but bugs. You see, um, just the way nature interacts with itself. And the coolest part, I think it was, I'm probably stealing some of the verbiage from him, but is it Chris Pratt had talked about this in an interview before, and he said it's the coolest thing ever. And he said it's probably the feel closest you could ever feel like being God is in those moments because you're completely invisible to everything that's there. He's like, nothing knows you're there. He's like, birds fly around you as if you're invisible. He's like, bugs crawl around like they don't know you're existing. And he was like, you're in the woods, honestly, as the apex predator in that moment. But nothing knows you're there or treats you as such. And he was like, so you just get to watch it do whatever it does. Yeah, I completely agree with him. That's my absolute favorite. Sunset's cool. But it's definitely sunrise. That's the moment where like you get to watch what was created come to life, and you get to, like, every morning you go out, you get to do it. It never, to me, it never gets old. Every morning I wake up and I go in the woods and I walk out, and that first moment happens where like it's the light's starting to change and you're starting to see, and you start hearing, squirrels coming down trees, and you start seeing some of the raccoons going back to trees and all that. And it's just, It is. It's just that dynamic where you're like, man, nothing has any clue that I exist right now. But you get to watch it all every day essentially come to life as if it's being created again right there in that moment.
Yeah. It's like one of the few places you can go these days and still get peace.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. What about you? I'm curious where you see it most.
Very much the same. It's like, especially this year, the only deer I got was a day that I actually went up and tried to focus on just being present with God. I was describing it to someone else in another podcast. I went to I'm fairly new to North Carolina, and I visited with my kids to the beach over the summer, and I was just watching the waves kind of wash up and then just fizzle down into the sand, and the just kind of the simplicity of that, but how just the water gets absorbed into the sand, it washes back up, it washes in. Um, the I don't know, the different strokes that it leaves within the sand. There's so much detail in something so simple that it's just looking at that and appreciating the creation that God has put together. And then there's always the aspects of like um, our own bodies, like healing and stuff like that. um, and being able to teach my son that, because like he sliced his hand open, and when he was really young, and I had to explain to him that God created us so that we're self-healing. I was even we were at the zoo just the other day for the first, and I'm looking at this big billboard that said intentional design or something like that. It was for puffin penguins,
Yeah.
and how they have the eggs a weird, almost like diamond shape, so that if they roll off one of the rocks, it'll stop and just kind of do this on the next rock instead of going into the ocean. And I just stood there, pointed at it, and said to my wife, "Tell me God doesn't exist."
Yep. That's cool. I love those moments. I love every time. I think one of my favorites ever um, was if you have to Google it, but there's a really cool article that talks about the spiritual relation to the breakdown of the central nervous system and the spinal column within the body, and how it connects back to God. And same thing. It's like it's when you start seeing stuff like that, like it's really hard to deny
Yeah,
that. Like there's a stirring that happens kind of within your spirit where you're just like, man, like you can't. That's not accidental. It just doesn't just happen by happenstance.
yeah, yeah. If you can find that, send that to me. I'd love to read that.
I definitely will. I definitely will. That's really cool. Yeah,
Appreciate it.
my oldest son, Tony, he was actually born with a condition called pseudoarthrosis. And essentially what it is there's a section of his tibia in his left leg that the lining of the bone was essentially not healthy. And when he was 3 days before his first birthday, I was helping him practice walking in the kitchen, and he actually fractured that leg just literally walking under his own weight.
Hmm.
Um, there was no way to know, no signs of anything. It just happened, and I took him to the ER, had X-rays done, found the fracture, found a couple anomalies that didn't really make sense or look right. So we went down this whole big process of hey, all right, let's try this treatment. It didn't work, so let's try this treatment. It didn't work, and ultimately ended up boiling down to they took a section of his tibia out. They took all the lining that was bad out, and then they actually took a graft from his hip, wrapped that around his tibia and fibia, and put a steel rod through his tibia from knee to ankle. And then they put a plate alongside of it to help stabilize everything. And this entire time that we're going through this process, my wife and I, like every appointment we went in with like this massive hope that we were just going to see a miracle.
Mm-hmm.
And then every appointment we get in there and she'd be like, it's not working. And it was just crushing. And we'd come out and the first thing we'd do, we'd get in the car and we'd pray about it. And it always helped, but it always, it's still just that battle, right? Of like, God's got the ultimate healing, but we're sitting here on Earth with our own human, doubt, trying to just hold on to our faith and believe, and ignore that. And he went through this process, and eventually it resulted in him having that large or major surgery. And when he had that, um, it was the initial game plan was like, hey, he's going to have this. We're going to monitor things. Hopefully his bone heals. And initially the plan was like, hey, let's just get one bone healed, um, and all that kind of stuff. And she said the best case scenario is that the bone graft takes completely 100%. His fibia and tibia fuse together and heal, and then he starts growing right away. She said worst case scenario is that his tibia heals, the bone graft dissipates, and he'll just basically have it reinforced by that rod, and he'll be fine for however long until he outgrows the rod, and then he has to have it replaced. And so we kind of battled this thing, and finally we were like, all right, let's we're going to do this operation. And funnily enough, the day before that major surgery, I saw the biggest buck I've ever seen in the woods on the hoof at 70 yards, dogging a doe into a creek bottom, and I couldn't get him to come over. And I was just like ate up. And then, of course, the next morning I'm down at the hospital. We're waiting for him to go back and get admitted for his surgery. And I get a picture on my phone from the trail camera of that deer, daylight. I was like, man, like of course, that's how it goes. But he had that surgery and he came out of it. And 3 months later, we went back for a follow up. And she said that his tibia had healed. And then 3 months later, we went back for another follow up, and his bone graft had taken 100%. And then 3 months later, we went back for another follow up, and she told us he had grown 5 millimeters in that time frame. His growth was even between his left and right legs, which was a concern they were worried about, was his left leg being shorter than the right. They're completely even. And then his fusion completely happened. And so there's a section of his lower leg where his tibia and fibia are actually one solid bone. And that was like best case scenario, because then it meant that like it would not break after that. Like that section of his tibia and fibia is as strong as a femur now, which is really cool. And we went back again a handful of months later for another follow up, and we walked in, and his doctor is very professional. She was always very even keeled, no emotional high, no emotional low. She's just right in the middle, no matter what. And she poked her head in, and she had this big grin on her face. And we're just like, what? Like, why are you smiling right now? And she came in and showed us imaging, and he was actually growing at such a rapid rate at that point that his body broke the wire that was holding the rod down to his ankle, that they had put in. And it was a titanium wire, and it completely pulled through it, and it snapped. And so in the imaging, you can see just two pieces of wire not connected to anything, and the base of the rod is starting to move up as he's growing. And she came in and told us again that he'd grown like 7 millimeters. And so what was cool was like that aspect of like the healing we wanted, or the path to healing, I guess, that we wanted wasn't necessarily what we got, but we still got that ultimate healing. And it was cool just being able to teach him through all that, and more than teach him, but like try and be the best examples of like, hey, I know this is hard. I know it hurts. I know, it's frustrating for you because you can't do these different things. But still being able to teach him like, hey, this is how we can pray through this. This is, how we can talk to God about it and that kind of stuff. And he came out of it now to where like we honestly, it's been about a year, or a little over a year actually. And we're at the point now where it's just really cool is that we're actually starting to forget the days that he was in, because he went through 13 casts, 3 boots, and I think it was 3 walking braces in the course of about 2 years, from the time he was 1 to almost 3. And we're to the point now where like we're having so many good memories and so much fun with him playing and him running around freely unassisted that like we honestly forget. And we catch ourselves sometimes. We're like, he'll do something and we'll just kind of look at each other and be like, man, a year ago he had a walking boot that was a third of his body. He could, and it's just like humbling and crazy to think about that now. And now, before I had to carry him everywhere in the woods and fishing and everything because he couldn't get his boot or his cast wet, and now he just like we'll hop out of the car and he's usually off to wherever we're going before I can stop him. And it makes it a lot cooler and a lot more fun. But a cool experience though to like go through that soon and that fast with him.
Yeah. That's I'm glad that turned out well, and you got what you guys prayed for.
Yeah.
Is the rod been removed?
No, it's still in there. The doctor essentially said that for the time being, we're going to leave it. And then as he continues to grow, he has 6 month follow ups now at this point, and we'll just kind of monitor how it does. Um, I'm hoping that the projection, because essentially if it doesn't start, it's a telescopic rod. And so if it doesn't start opening up, then it's essentially useless because
Mm-hmm.
of the fact that its tibia and fibia fuse together. Um, it's just not really serving its actual purpose. It's just kind of in there. And so we had a conversation about maybe when he hits 5 or 6 years old, if it's still the same way where it's just kind of there, we might go in and actually go through the process of having it removed. Um, but it's going to probably boil down to like, is it actually causing any issues to him? Does he notice it? Is it bothering him? Is he having any like pain in his leg or anything? Then it might be a conversation like, yeah, let's get it out of there. But right now, the immediate game plan is just to leave it. I personally and ideally would like to see it come out of, eventually within the next few years. And then the healing process for that she was telling us was like super simple. He might have a cast essentially for a handful of days until, everything heals up in the middle of the bone. She was like, that area is bone, was it bone marrow or she's like, it heals super rapidly. And she was like, and he had no issue with that aspect of healing. So she was like, we take the rod out, and she was like 4 weeks and it'll be fine. So.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess it would be difficult to get to. It would be a bit invasive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. But he doesn't seem to care now.
Oh,
So
yeah.
like, if it doesn't bother you, it doesn't bother me, man.
Probably doesn't know any better.
No, not at this point. We ask him questions about it, like, do you remember your leg? Do you remember your brace? And he's obviously got scars. And so every so often, he calls them his tattoos. Every so often, like he'll, get done with a bath or something, and he'll be like, oh, look at my tattoo, because he'll get cold and it'll kind of look purple. And look at my purple tattoos, pointing at the incision marks on his leg and everything. But yeah, he doesn't, outside of that, it's like he doesn't even acknowledge it anymore. He doesn't talk about it, doesn't think about it. And I'm like, well, good.
You talk to him about faith?
Yeah, all the time. It's actually really fun at night. We've got a routine where we ask him, hey, is there anything you want to talk to God about tonight before we go to bed? And essentially, like, I'd say probably half the time he just says no. And he's like, I want to go to sleep or something. But the other half of the time, it's been anything from like the seemingly goofy, silliest things to some actually surprisingly like big things. Like there was one night where he'd kind of been a little bit mean to his brother earlier in the evening, and we had sat down and had a talk about treating other people and all that kind of stuff. And what was really cool is when he went to bed that night, my wife asked him, like, hey, is there anything you want to talk to God about tonight? And he kind of got quiet, and he looked away for a minute, and then he looked back at her and he said, I wanna talk about being mean to Jet. And she said, do you want to say you're sorry to God for being mean to your brother? And he went, yeah, I think so. She was like, okay. And so they sat and prayed together about that. And he leads like all our meal prayers whenever we're eating together as a family and stuff. He leads those prayers, and I mean, it's short and simple and sweet, like a 3-year-old would make it, but he does it with confidence. He does it loud, and it's really cool to see. And now it's gotten to the point where like every family dinner we had for the holidays, everybody was asking him to do it in the family because they know he can. And so those bigger settings, and my mom, hey, Tony, say grace for Christmas dinner. And he's like, I don't know. And I'm like, come on, like, you can do it. It's no different than at home, talk loud, be proud, and he does kids church, and we talk about that, when he comes out, he's usually got a craft or something that they did that's themed to whatever lesson they learned. And we'll talk about it. And what did you learn? And that kind of stuff. And he's what's really interesting is that he kind of by his own, I guess, curiosity or interest. Typically the routine was we'd get to church, we'd drop him and his brother off, and then, we'd go into the main sanctuary. He'd be in kids' church, and we'd have that dynamic. And then there was one day where we walked in and he literally looked at me and said, "Can I come to big church with you?" I was like, "Yeah, if you want to." I'm like, but at a certain point, you got to sit down and be quiet. And now he's in a routine where he comes in and he sings the first couple songs with us in big church, and then he goes to kids' church for the rest of the service, which is really cool. But we have conversations with him a ton about it. Jet's at the point where like he's starting to talk a lot more, and so we're kind of starting that process with him too, of like talking more about Jesus with him, and teaching him different things. And all the books we read primarily at bedtime are something to do with like a Bible story or um, Jesus related or something. And then every now and again, depending on if they say they want it or not, like I'll sing Jesus Loves Me with them or something, some kind of a simple gospel song or something along those lines with them for a little while. My oldest, for the longest time when he was little, the only thing that would calm him down was me singing Amazing Grace to him. And, just stand up in his bedroom holding him, singing Amazing Grace for forever, just, and he'd just sit there and watch me, and then he'd eventually fall asleep. And like, that was the only thing for probably about a 3-month stretch that would like calm him down when he was little.
Yeah.
Or little, I should say. I mean, he's still relatively small, but
those consistent songs. I think with I don't know about my youngest. I might have done it a couple of times, but my older two, I would hum. I can't remember the name of the song. It's from Sleeping Beauty. It's like the main.
Oh yeah.
Hum. So I would just hum that because it was easy to go on a loop, and I could count in my head or do different things.
Yeah.
So when my son was 4 or 5, maybe closer to 5, they watched Sleeping Beauty for the first time, and he was just like, "Why do I know this song?"
That sounds familiar.
Yeah.
That's really
that was
cool.
kind of funny. It just sticks in their head. Like that calming, I guess, tune that just it goes in their core memories.
Silent Night is one that my youngest loves. He's a big fan of that one. And what's funny about that one is I can never remember the second verse. I can always sing the first one all the way through, and then I get to the second one, I'm like, I really don't remember. So then I start humming it.
Yeah.
Because it's the same cadence, the same, you just loop it back through. And he likes that one a lot. That's his like it so much so to like if we're in public in the middle of the day and I'm holding him and I start humming that song, he lays his head on my shoulder because he thinks it's time to go to sleep for whatever reason. He's like, "Oh, okay, well, yeah." But yeah, there's a dynamic of that I don't know if I like expected it. There was a lot about fatherhood. Like I'm one of those weird guys, and I tell people this all the time. Like a lot of guys aren't thinking about being dads for the most part. I mean, at a certain point, like way off in the distant future. But I vividly remember being somewhere around like the end of age 16, early 17. Vividly remember like being excited for the day down the road I was going to be a dad.
Yeah.
And like thinking about like what things do I want to teach my kids? What things do I want to do with my kids? And I think the biggest reason for that was because I grew up with an awesome father that was just a great example, and his kids were his, favorite thing in the world. And I just wanted nothing more than to duplicate that and have that same relationship with my kids. And I think a big reason of that is I had the greatest relationship with my dad. But even with like my other step parents or my mom or other, the dynamics I would see between my friends and their parents, like none of it touched what my dad and I had. And I just remember thinking when I was like 16, 17, because I was at the age where like, I was like, I'm getting closer to college. I need to be more serious. For me personally, I need to be more serious about dating and who I'm actually spending time with and that kind of stuff. And I just really started thinking about like, man, what do I need to start doing now to make sure that like I can do the same things and have the same kind of relationship with my kids that my dad had with me? Because like he did an excellent job, and he came from a relationship with his father that was very abusive, There's a lot of PTSD from a couple wars that he served in that, followed him back home and kind of ran his life for a while. And um, a lot of stuff that my dad could have easily passed on.
Hmm.
And he did a pretty adamant job of making sure none of that stuff passed on. And I tell people this all the time that my favorite moments now as a dad are every time I get to have me, my dad, and my kids together, doing anything, especially if it's in the outdoors. Um, and the sole reason is because those are the moments where I feel like my dad gets the opportunity to see the fruits of his labor
Right.
actually come to fruition in front of him, because he used to tell me stories all the time about like all the things that he protected us from growing up, that, those, times where like he would almost lose his temper and he'd have to walk out, or just different things where he was like, he fought really hard to make sure that a lot of the things his dad did to him, he didn't pass on and do to his kids. And because of that example, I truly believe there's a lot of that there that, um, transitioned into the way that I, am as a father and as a dad, and having a gentle side, and, being able to sit down with my sons, and like, I'm that dad where like I sit down and we say, I love you every day, multiple times a day. We give each other hugs and that kind of stuff. And, but we still turn around and we wrestle and play hard enough and rough and tumble play enough to make my wife gasp and freak out a couple times.
Yeah.
And, that dynamic there though, having the opportunity to get my sons around their grandfather, my dad, and all of us sharing the same passions and enjoyment, where, like we get to all go fishing together, or, one of my most probably one of my most emotional moments I've had as a dad was when we got done with that deer hunt this year, and I had kind of walked off a little bit ahead. And, I do self film a lot and get a lot of stuff for different content reasons. But a big part of it too is like, I just want to have all the memories to go back and watch again and replay and all that. And, I turned around at one point and my dad is walking side by side with my 3-year-old, and my 3-year-old is recapping the hunt to my dad as if he wasn't there,
Mm.
and telling him his experience of the hunt from his point of view. And I turned around and I pulled my phone out and I just stood there and I recorded them walking back together. Um, just them two. And like, I was on the verge of breaking down, because I just remember being like, it was one of those times where I was like, this is one of those aspects of my life that I prayed I'd have, above all else, that I'd be able to give my dad sons that he could connect with the same way he connected with us, and that he could just enjoy being a dad or being a grandfather, and, not have to worry like, hey, did I do a good enough job raising my son that I don't have to worry about my grandsons? Like I can just experience the joy with them, and the happiness and the laughter and everything that they bring into his life. And, um, I love that dynamic. And the other thing too, I told my wife this at one point, and I'm sure I probably at some point made a post about it. But one of the greatest joys in my life, and one of the things I think is the coolest, is if you're fortunate enough to have your parents around when you have kids. One thing I love to do is when especially my mom or my dad, when they are playing one on one with our kids, um, I try and kind of make myself invisible so I can watch them. And the reason I do it is because like, if you really think about it in the grand scheme, none of us realize how much our parents loved us. Like it's pretty much impossible to think about like, hey, when I was newborn through 4 or 5 years old, I really had no idea. Right. Um, and one of the coolest things ever was like, I sat back one day and I watched my mom play with, our grands or our sons. I watched my dad play with our sons. And I just kind of hung back and watched from afar, kind of invisible, and the joy that they had. I just sat there and I looked at my wife and I was like, I can only imagine that's how excited and joyful they were when we were born.
Hmm.
Like I don't think there's any other way that you could see. I don't think there's any other way, with the exception of like maybe asking God to show you when you get to heaven, that you could witness how your parents felt about you coming into their life for the first time, outside of watching them interact and play with their grandkids. Like it just floors me every time.
Yeah.
And it's, I don't know, it hits a special spot for me.
I can imagine. That's the great thing about being a dad, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Put on a brave face and carry a soft heart.
Yeah. My wife likes to tease me that I'm a bit of a um, well, there's daddy's girl, and then there's I don't know what the other way around is. I got a soft spot for my daughter, basically.
Oh man, I can't
Yeah,
even imagine.
and she's probably the worst when it comes to like temper tantrums or getting in trouble when she knows she's not supposed to. But if she
Right.
comes to me, I can't help it. Sure, you can have a cookie.
There's it's funny because our second one, I very, very badly wanted to have a daughter. I want to be a girl dad like you can't imagine. And whenever I see father daughter things, like I'm fairly confident it's one of those situations where like God knows the truth, the deep desires of my heart, and He knows that I want that, and He's going to give it to us at some point. I just, obviously I don't know when, I don't know in what realm or aspect, but every time I see father daughter stuff or I hear fathers talking about their daughters, like I just know. I mean, three nights ago, I think it was, we saw something on TV of a dad holding his newborn daughter, and I just was like on the verge of tears. And I looked at her and I was like, I'm gonna be such a mess. Like, I
Hmm.
just know like any kind of toughness I've got is just gone out the window. Like it's just not gonna like I'm so excited for it. But at the same time, I know I'm gonna be right there with you. I'm gonna be that dad that's like, man, if you come to me before your mom, you're gonna get whatever you want.
Yeah, pretty much. And then you're in trouble with the wife.
Yeah. I'm sure that's how it's going to go. I have no doubts in my mind.
Yeah. How many more kids are you guys planning on having?
I think three. Um,
Three total or
initially
three more?
three total.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
three total. Yeah, I don't know if I can do five. Um, we we've kind of gone back and forth. Like I think we always knew we wanted to have three. Um, and we knew we wanted to have the first two ourselves, and the third one we have kind of tossed the idea around of adoption.
Mm-hmm.
My wife is an occupational therapist, and she grew up around disabilities in some different aspects, and we actually tossed around the idea of adoption of a special needs child. Um, and going through those different dynamics, we just kind of don't know. I think we're in a season where we're trying to figure out what God wants us to do in that realm of things. Um, which, by no means are we in any hurry with a 3 and 1 year old that are, less than 2 years apart. And once one leaves the stage, the next one's right into the next stage. And it's, there's, there's no like break between, like terrible twos to the next one. It's like, nope, we're just once one ends, all right, the next one's in it too. Let's keep on rolling. And,
Yeah.
the other aspect too is like we both definitely want them to be a good bit older before that aspect so they have a better understanding of some different things and um, can help a little bit more. They understand, how and what kind of things they need to teach and those things. And um, so we talked about, down the road, we'd like to have a third, but how we go about that, we just don't know. We don't know if we want to try for the third personally. We don't know if we want to go the adoption route or adopting a child with special needs yet. We've tossed around every idea, and none of them at the moment seem like the step we're supposed to take. And so we're just kind of like, you know what, like we can talk about it and um, theorize about it and imagine what it's going to be like. But until we feel like it's that time or we're being led there or pushed there, I think we're just kind of content with where we're at and trying to juggle two boys that, I mean, I was a kid that grew up in a house where it was, I was the older brother and it was my younger brother for the longest time until we were about, 7, 8 years old. And I don't know how my dad did it.
Hmm.
I've told him before, I'm like, dude, I don't know how you did this. I said, 'cause again, single dad, I was like, my wife's here. It's like there's days where we're trying to, like, we don't know how you managed to do this, man. Like, um, blows my mind.
Yeah.
But
Have you considered fostering?
I haven't. I actually we've had a couple friends that have done it. It's popped more into my mind lately. I just don't think I know enough about it to really say anything about it yet. Like I haven't learned enough about, the different dynamics of it and what options are available and how the whole process and everything works. So I think
Right.
because of that, it just hasn't been in the forefront of my mind. But I wouldn't say that like I'm closed off to it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um,
The first episode I did was actually with a buddy of mine, and he did fostering for a little while. And his daughter he ended up adopting through that process.
oh, that's really cool. How old was she?
I don't know how old she was. Let's see, probably 5 or 6 if I had to guess
Okay. Okay.
at the time. And that's just me trying to put it in my head, timeline wise, about how old I think she is now.
Right. Right.
So, but yeah, I mean, I'm sure he'd be more than willing to chat with you about it if you wanted me to put you in contact with him.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely that age range too sounds like something if I was going to do the fostering route, like it would be more that um that like a little bit earlier or a little bit
Right.
further into childhood a little bit and then have them
Yeah.
from elementary age on through.
Probably want to have the boys a little older too.
Very, yeah, yeah. Again, I think that's a big dynamic for us is like them just being able to understand things because that's one of the hardest challenges now is there's still a lot that Tony doesn't understand in terms of like how he needs to behave and things he needs to do and different intricacies of life. But then to the same token, he also is at the stage where he doesn't understand that his younger brother is not old enough to understand stuff yet. So like the whole sharing toys thing, and this is your toy versus his toy, and that like his younger brother is still at the age where he just thinks everything's free game, and Tony is very much at the age where he's like, well, no, this is mine. I should have it. Like it is my thing that I got. And so we're in that dynamic of like, you're not wrong. However, he doesn't get that yet. He's still learning.
Yeah.
Try teaching, and then being in that dynamic, and I'm like, I don't want to go back to that again. Another, super young one within a couple of years. I was like, let's space it out a while. Like let's get them into a realm where they understand that dynamic and those kind of things. And I was like, and then we can talk about it again. That way we're only teaching one child that again instead of two at the same time.
Right.
But
I think I want to say that my kids, like the biggest gap or milestone between them is like right when my son was being potty trained, my daughter was recently born, and I want to say it was the same thing with the third one, is my daughter was getting potty trained, and then the third one was uh, new to the house. Um, so that's definitely been something that's one of those big things that's nice that there's not like okay, now let's change the next kid and kind of thing. It's all been separated.
yeah, yeah, it sounds similar to where we're at. Our oldest is just about done with potty training, and the youngest is like he's starting to take an interest. And I think part of it's because he sees everybody else in the family is going to the bathroom and using the potty, and he sees his younger his older brother do it, and so he's kind of starting to show a little bit of interest in it. And so we've kind of been starting to introduce a couple things just like we did with Tony. But it is one of those things where like Tony's pretty much potty trained for the most part, with the exception of nighttime and a couple accidents, randomly, but getting further and further apart. And
Hmm.
Jet is like right on the brink of like it started all over again. And it's just like we've talked about like, all right, we're ready for it. Like we got to get through it. We got to do it again. And we're just going to have to deal with it. And then after that, we won't have to do it anymore.
Yeah. So one of the things I was you mentioned before that I was a little curious to go back to, just because I recently heard about it myself, is the mobile hunting expo.
Yeah.
What exactly what's that experience like for you?
So I want to say, I'm trying to remember timelines here. The first one that was ever put on was very like short notice, essentially. Um, the guys were kind of, they were already had their like a little group formed, and they were kind of throwing around this idea of doing it. And I was part of the Facebook page as just like, a regular guy on social media. Um, and I had really started getting into more of the mobile hunting scene in terms of like some of the lighter weight gear and different methods to climb and pack stuff in and out and all that kind of stuff. And they put together in about 3.5 weeks with some smaller level companies a little expo for a couple days at a fairground in Ohio, and had honestly like a much bigger turnout than ever was expected. I went down there just attending, and what was kind of funny is I came down, and that very first one, it was very much kind of open. I don't want to say free for all, but like anybody could bring what they use currently and try it out or show somebody. Or, we had trees outside of the venue that, guys could go over and practice different climbing methods on, and things of that nature. And so at the time, there were a few companies that couldn't make it. And I happened to have like a saddle from one of them, a platform from another, and I think maybe a climbing stick or something of that nature. And so I reached out to the guy running it, and I said, "Hey, is it okay if I bring these things down and just have them on display to demo?" And he said, "Yeah." He goes, "If you're okay with putting your equipment out there, like, we don't have any issue with it." And so I rolled down and initially started off the day as an attendee, went around to a couple booths and everything. And then when I came back to where my stuff was, there were a couple guys like asking questions about the saddle I had hanging up. And at the time, most of the people there had been familiar with like traditional single panel saddles. It was the first 2-panel that was on the market that Latitude had originally made. And I had one. And so a couple of the guys that were standing there were like, "Honestly, we've never used it." And then I walked up, and I believe it was Chris. He was like, "It's this guy's. He's been hunting out of it for the last year." And he was like, just ask him questions. And so I initially was only supposed to be there for about 3.5 hours. I ended up there for 9 hours, showing people the saddle, showing people the platforms, talking to people about the different intricacies of saddle hunting and all this kind of stuff. And by the end of it, I left. Chris actually called me, and he said, "Hey," he goes, "we could use another guy, on our team to help with content and, teaching people about this stuff and working the expos, because we want to keep doing this and all that." Took some time to think about it. And, I was like, I told him, I said, my only caveats to this is like, my family is the most important thing. So if at any point this conflicts in a way that, hurts my family or goes against, what my family and I want to do for our core unit and everything. And I was like, I'm out of no disrespect or anything, but that's what I'm going to choose. And he was like, "No," he's like, 100% get it, and it actually got to a point where this past year, we were in a spot with both our kids being young, Tony being, fairly recent post-op from his surgery and all that kind of stuff, where it was like, I just didn't have the ability and the bandwidth to travel and work 3 shows 4 days a piece. So I literally told him, I said, "Hey, look," I was like, "I'll probably attend one for one day in Michigan because it was the closest. But in terms of going and working all the other shows and stuff, I was like, I'm not on the list this year. Like just don't expect me to commit to any of that." But I think the coolest part about it is every year, every show, there's like no animosity. I've been to some trade shows in the past, both hunting and fishing, and a lot of the times there's just these like little niche, these couple guys over here know each other, and they'll actually have experience where I've been at an expo talking to a guy and been like, "Yeah, I saw something similar to this over here." And the next words out of his mouth is just immediately bad mouthing the guy. And, he's, does all these bad things, and he hates this and he's that and blah, there's just animosity around everything. And it's like, nobody really works together. And what's really cool about the expos and the way that we try and do things is that every company we vet before they come in to make sure that like the products they're putting out there are something that's, legitimately we're going to use, legitimately makes sense to have there. We're not just trying to fill booth space for revenue purposes. Like, and then at the same time, it's like, if we catch word of a vendor or something that's, bad mouthing somebody or sabotaging something or any of that kind of stuff, like we immediately are done. Like we're not about it. We're very much about, hey, we can work together. Chris likes to say, if we all build a big enough table, we all have a spot to sit, you know.
Hmm.
um, and that dynamic is really what we've established with that. And so this year I'm really excited because we're in a position where I think it's going to be biggest in terms of attendance. The reason I get excited about that is because probably about 50% of the show is centered around teaching um, people about hunting and how to become better whitetail hunters. And so we try and find, consistent um, guys with consistent success in the whitetail woods and have them come in and teach about a different dynamic of whitetail hunting that they specify in. So we've had guys like Tom Brownlee, who's a scent expert, come in and talk about scent and scent control and different ways that you can, mitigate your scent or use wind to control where it's going and how deer smell. We've had guys come in and talk about food and vegetation and, what deer's diets actually consist of. And other guys talking about, tactics for during the rut versus during early season versus late season and all these different, little intricacies of deer hunting that all, eventually make you better. But I think the even cooler part about it is rarely do we have anybody teaching who has the same style as the next.
Hmm.
We've had guys come in that they literally say, the predominant hunting I do is on private land, but every now and again I do public. And then there's other guys that get up there and they're like, oh, I only do public. And then there's other guys that say, well, I hunt transition areas 80% of the time. And then the next speaker will say, well, I hunt bedding areas 100% of the time, but what I like about it is it's like no one of them is right. No one of them is wrong, but they're sharing what they found the most success with in their particular style. And I think it's kind of like anything that has multiple styles and facets that involves that dynamic of getting better at your craft is typically, without even trying, most of the time you kind of start to go down a specific avenue of how you do what you do. And so what I like about that is we kind of bring all realms to the table to where, like, I mean, I was a guy that, like, if I went out and I hunted over food, period, case closed. Like, that's what I did.
Hmm.
And a lot of the times it ruined me because most of the food I was hunting over was a nighttime food source and deer weren't hitting it during the day. And one time at one of those expos, I listened to a guy talk about getting closer to bedding areas and finding those areas. And the very next year, I put a ton of time in scouting, trying to find that kind of stuff. I worked with Chris a lot, just learning about where and why deer bed where they do. And after that, it was like that following year, I had more success in the woods than I had ever had years prior. And what was cool though, is it was like I had funneled myself down this one route and got so narrow minded in it. But then because we have such a variety at the expo of different techniques and knowledge and stuff, it opened it back up to a different dynamic. And then out of that, the intangibles of, the friendships that I've developed is insane. Every year when I show up, I think the coolest thing is I get guys coming left and right. Hey man, how's, like, this past year I showed up in Michigan as an attendee. I didn't work it. So I was only there for about, maybe 4 or 5 hours with my dad and my oldest son. And the coolest part to me was that as I was walking around, folks were walking up to me left and right. Oh my gosh, is that Tony? We hear, like, man, that's, yeah, he literally was famous at the expo simply because all these guys that, we're all friends on social media. We all have the same passion around hunting. They see me post him. They see our hunting trips. They see our scouting trips, and they see him playing with his toy bow. And so when we were there, the intangibles of just those relationships created through the expo were how welcomed he was.
Hmm.
He wasn't a stranger to anybody. Every single person asked how his leg was doing. Is he in pain? Is he healed? How's that going? I remember the second year, Greg Staggs is a guy I look up to a lot. And what was really cool and humbling was we were having breakfast that the morning of the second day before the vendors all got there and everything started. We were kind of having breakfast as a team, and I was FaceTiming my wife and Tony at the time. Jet wasn't born. And as I'm FaceTiming him, Greg Staggs walks over and he leans over my shoulder and he says hello. And then he takes my phone and he starts talking to Tony and just literally did nothing but tell Tony how cool his dad was. And I was like, man, like those, I don't have, I can't count on, one hand the amount of men I've got in my life that I've got a relationship with like that, they will turn around and tell my kids, like, man, your dad loves you more than anything. He's so proud of you and he's excited for, and all that stuff. It was, I don't know, 7:30 in the morning. And I was just floored. And so like those are the coolest parts about what we've managed to put together with the Expo environment, that people come for the products and they come for the gear, and maybe because a buddy invited them, but then by the time they leave, like, they've made more new friends, they've learned more new things, they've connected with people online, and they're sharing success. We've literally had guys have career path changes, completely diverting from what they are doing already, because they came to an expo, they connected with somebody that, whether it was the owner of a company or somebody that worked at the company or whatever, and they had a skill set and they were looking, and, it somehow meshed, and now turned into a great relationship there. And it was all facilitated by that. So it's cool. We call it, we say that it's like summer deer camp, because that's really what it feels like by the end of it. But it's hard to really put into words and nail down the experience and the feeling until you've been there. And like everybody that's been there, like we all know, we're all like, we're all excited to get back together. I know this year, like I've been already asking a couple guys, like, hey, are you going to make it? Which one are you going to? I got a bunch of Ohio buddies that couldn't make it last year, and one of them is going to be in Ohio this year, so they're all excited about coming out. And
is it not always in the same place?
So the first year we had it in Ohio. The second year we did Michigan and Chattanooga. The third year we did Georgia, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. That was last year, I believe. This year we're cutting back to 2 shows. We're doing Dalton, Georgia again, and then we're going to do somewhere around Wilmington, Ohio, I believe is the location for the Ohio one. And they'll both be in the beginning of August, right before the rest of deer seasons kick off. So
funny enough, those are both almost the exact distance from me.
Oh, really?
So I just have to pick one. I'm probably, if I'm going to make one, I think I'm going to come up to the Ohio one.
Oh, heck yeah, do it for sure. There's on your way up, if you get close to it, there's a small little towns where my wife went to grad school at called Portsmouth.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a killer steakhouse down there called the Scioto River, Ribber. It virtually sits right on the Scioto River and Ohio River areas. And I went down there. Gosh, it's been a while now. But she's in grad school. I went down there. And one of the things that I like to do if I'm in a new city or something is I try and find like the small local food joints and try them out. And that was one that popped up. So we went over there for dinner one night, and I walked in. When you open the menu, you get an option for your steak, and it just says small or large. That's all they tell you. Come to find out, a small is 16 ounces and a large is 32 ounces. And so at the time I was a competitive power lifter, and I was like, well, I can eat big. So I, with all the confidence and ego in the world, said large. And she came out and set this massive steak down in front of me. And I finished the steak. I did not touch the sides. We had gotten mac and cheese and something else to split. And I was like, no, 32 ounces of beef in me. I'm not going to be eating anything else. Get that point.
Did the price reflect that?
If I remember right, yeah. I mean, it wasn't the cheapest thing in the world. It was probably like middle of the road, but it tasted way better than middle of the road.
Yeah.
There's a lot of guys that love it.
I just mean, like, if you were looking at the menu, small and large, you saw the price, could you maybe have guessed that's how big it was going to
be? No, I didn't actually. I didn't even ask her. Like, I think I was sitting there and I was just like, I guess I'll have a large, because in my mind, a small is like an 8-ounce, sirloin or something.
Sure.
And so I think I just said large because I was like, well, I want a big steak. And when she came out and she set that down in front of me, I was like, how big is a small? And she was like 16 ounces. And I was like, and this is, and she went 32. And I was like, oh, like, well, thanks. But it was, I mean, it was phenomenal.
It sounds like it must have been like a tomahawk.
I don't remember it being a tomahawk. To the bet, I don't think it was. It might have, unless they just pulled the bone out and threw all the meat down and said here.
Maybe.
But regardless, highly recommended if you're coming up through there and it's around dinner time.
Yeah, no, I'll definitely have to put that on the list. I guess if I'm able to make it up, it sounds like I might run into you at the expo.
Oh yeah, for sure.
That was pretty much everything I had for this episode. Did you have anything that you were hoping to bring up?
No, man. I honestly, I appreciate you giving me the time and having me on and getting to talk. You know, it's the three things I'm most passionate about are family, God, and the outdoors. So having the opportunity to express it, talk about it, and rehash some memories with it is always a fun way to spend an evening.
Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing all that.
Definitely, man. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for tuning in on greatoutdoorspodcast.com. And if you happen to be listening or watching on one of our social media platforms, you should check out greatoutdoorspodcast.com for some cool merch like this hat or this awesome coffee cup for camping. And this awesome sweater as well, which features our classic Genesis 27-3. Take your quiver and your bow and go hunt me some venison. Your wife's gonna love the way you look in this. Right, honey?
Mm-hmm.
greatoutdoorspodcast.com.
Why?